The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Captain James Morrison adjusted his ceremonial sword for the third time in 10 minutes. His hands trembled slightly, not from the April chill that hung in the air, but from the weight of what lay ahead. Today would mark one of the most significant ceremonies in the household cavalry's recent history, and every detail had to be perfect. Morrison had served with the Blues and Royals for 15 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for organizing a tribute to Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who had passed away just days earlier on April 9th, 2021. The entire nation was in mourning, and the household cavalry, as the sovereign's official bodyguard, bore the responsibility of honoring a man who had dedicated over 7 decades of his life to public service. The phone call had come at dawn 3 days ago. Colonel Sarah Henderson, commanding officer of the Household Cavalry Regiment, had summoned Morrison to her office in the Wellington barracks. The conversation was brief, but loaded with significance. "Morrison, I need you to coordinate something special," Henderson had said, her voice carrying the weight of tradition and expectation. "We're going to honor the Duke properly, and it needs to be visible from Windsor Castle. The Queen should be able to see it from her window." Morrison had nodded, understanding immediately. Prince Philip had been Colonel-in-Chief of the Blues and Royals since 1969, and his connection to the regiment ran deeper than ceremonial titles. He had genuinely cared about the soldiers, their welfare, and their traditions. Stories circulated among the ranks of his impromptu visits to the barracks, his sharp questions about equipment and training, and his genuine interest in the lives of ordinary troopers. Now, as Morrison stood on the long walk opposite Windsor Castle, he could see the ancient fortress rising majestically against the morning sky. Somewhere behind those stone walls, Queen Elizabeth II was beginning what would be the most difficult week of her long reign. She had lost not just her husband of 73 years, but her constant companion and support through decades of public duty. The long walk stretched for nearly 3 miles, a perfect avenue lined with elm trees that had witnessed centuries of royal history. It was here that Morrison and his team had decided to stage their tribute. The symbolism was perfect. The household cavalry would form up in full view of the castle, close enough for the Queen to observe from her private apartments, yet respectfully distant. Trooper Michael Chun was among the first to arrive at the assembly point. At 22, he was one of the youngest members of the regiment, having joined straight from the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst just 18 months earlier. Like many of his generation, Prince Philip had been a distant figure until recent weeks, when the announcement of his retirement from public duties in 2017 had brought his remarkable service record into sharp focus. Chun had spent hours researching the Duke's military career in preparation for today's ceremony. The statistics were staggering. Prince Philip had served in the Royal Navy during World War II, seeing action in the Mediterranean and Pacific theaters. He had been mentioned in dispatches for his role in the Battle of Cape Matapan and had served on several destroyers before the war's end. But it was Philip's post-war dedication to military charities and his role with the household cavalry that resonated most with Chun and his fellow troopers. The Duke had understood military life because he had lived it. When he spoke to soldiers, it was with the authority of someone who had faced enemy fire and understood the unique challenges of military service. Sergeant Major William Roberts had served longer than any other member of the regiment currently on active duty. At 54, he had joined the Blues and Royals in 1985 and had personally met Prince Philip on several occasions. The memories of those encounters would stay with him forever. The first meeting had been in 1992 during a regimental inspection. Roberts, then a young corporal, had been nervous about presenting arms to such a distinguished figure. But Prince Philip had put him at ease immediately with a question about his horse's temperament and a comment about the quality of the morning's drill. He wasn't just going through the motions, Roberts recalled telling his wife the night before the ceremony. He genuinely cared about what we did and how we did it. You could see in his eyes, he understood what it meant to serve. Over the years, Roberts had witnessed Prince Philip's evolution from active naval officer to senior royal, but The military bearing had never left him. Even in his 90s, the Duke had stood straight during ceremonies, his eyes sharp and alert, missing nothing. Now, as Roberts supervised the arrival of horses and equipment for the tribute ceremony, he felt the full weight of saying goodbye to someone who had been a constant presence throughout his career. The household cavalry was losing not just a colonel-in-chief, but a genuine friend and advocate. The morning preparations continued with military precision. Each horse was groomed to perfection, their coats gleaming in the strengthening sunlight. The ceremonial uniforms were inspected multiple times, every button polished, every plume positioned correctly, every sword blade cleaned until it shone like a mirror. The Blues and Royals had a reputation for excellence that dated back to their formation in 1969, when the Royal Horse Guards merged with the 1st Royal Dragoons. But their lineage stretched back much further, to regiments that had served the crown for over 3 centuries. Today, that tradition would be on full display. Lieutenant Emma Williams, the regiment's youngest commissioned officer, had been tasked with coordinating the musical element of the tribute. At 25, she brought a fresh perspective to military tradition while respecting its importance. Her challenge was to select pieces that would honor Prince Philip's memory while being audible to any members of the royal family who might be watching from the castle. Williams had consulted with the household cavalry's bandmaster about appropriate music. They had settled on a combination of traditional military marches and pieces with personal significance to Prince Philip. The selection would include Heart of Oak, the official march of the Royal Navy, honoring his naval service, and the Life Guard's Slow March, representing his connection to the household cavalry. But Williams had also discovered that Prince Philip had a particular fondness for Jerusalem, the patriotic hymn that had become an unofficial English anthem. The decision to include it in the ceremony felt right. It captured both his love of country and his spiritual depth. As the morning progressed, more members of the regiment arrived at the assembly point. Each brought their own memories and connections to Prince Philip. Some had served during his official visits to the regiment. Others had only heard stories from senior colleagues. But all understood the significance of what they were about to do. The horses were perhaps the most magnificent element of the tribute. The household cavalry's mounts were bred and trained specifically for ceremonial duties, their bloodlines carefully maintained for generations. These were not ordinary cavalry horses. They were athletes trained to perform in front of crowds, to remain calm amid noise and pageantry, and to carry themselves with the dignity befitting their role as bearers of royal tradition. Black Velvet, the horse that would carry Captain Morrison during the ceremony, was a particular favorite of Prince Philip's. The Duke had complimented the horse's bearing during a 2019 inspection, noting the animal's exceptional temperament and training. Today, Black Velvet would play a central role in honoring the man who had appreciated his qualities. The connection between Prince Philip and the horses of the household cavalry ran deep. As a young man, the Duke had been an accomplished equestrian, competing in carriage driving well into his 70s. He understood horses not just as ceremonial props, but as partners requiring skill, patience, and respect to manage effectively. Stories circulated among the cavalry about Prince Philip's ability to spot problems with horses or equipment that others might miss. During one memorable inspection in the 1990s, he had noticed a horse favoring one hoof slightly and recommended a veterinary check that revealed an early-stage injury. The intervention had likely saved the animal from more serious damage. As the final preparations continued, Morrison received word that representatives from other units of the Household Division would be joining the tribute. The Foot Guards, Grenadier, Coldstream, Scots, Irish, and Welsh would send color parties to participate in the ceremony. The sight of Britain's most elite military units coming together to honor Prince Philip would be truly spectacular. The weather was holding perfectly. April in Windsor could be unpredictable, with sudden showers or gusty winds that could disrupt outdoor ceremonies. But today offered clear skies and gentle breezes, conditions that seemed fitting for such a solemn occasion. Morrison checked his watch and realized that in less than 2 hours, the ceremony would begin. Across the long walk, Windsor Castle stood ready to witness one of the most heartfelt tributes in its long history. Somewhere within those ancient walls, a queen prepared to say goodbye to her beloved husband, supported by the knowledge that those who had served under his leadership would honor his memory with dignity and precision. The household cavalry was ready. The tribute to Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, would be everything his service and sacrifice deserved. As the morning sun climbed higher over Windsor, the stage was set for a ceremony that would be remembered for generations. In the distance, the first sounds of military bands tuning their instruments could be heard, mixing with the gentle sounds of horses and the quiet conversations of soldiers preparing for one of the most important duties of their careers. Today, the household cavalry would demonstrate why they remained the sovereign's most trusted guardians, honoring a man who had embodied the very best of military service and royal duty. The ceremony would begin soon, and, with it, a tribute that would echo across the centuries of tradition that bound the household cavalry to the crown they served with such devotion and pride. The sound of steel-shod hooves on stone echoed across the long walk as the first squadron of the household cavalry moved into position. Captain Morrison rode at the front of the formation, his practiced eye scanning the alignment of his troops. Behind him, 48 of Britain's finest cavalry soldiers sat motionless on their mounts, each one a testament to months of rigorous training and centuries of military tradition. The ceremony had been planned down to the smallest detail, but Morrison knew that no amount of preparation could account for every variable. Horses were living creatures with minds of their own, and even the best-trained mounts could react unexpectedly to crowds, noise, or sudden movements. Today's tribute to Prince Philip would require not just precision, but the kind of horsemanship that separated the household cavalry from every other military unit in the world. Trooper Sarah Davies sat astride Mercury, a 7-year-old gelding with a coat so black it seemed to absorb the morning light. Davies had been selected for today's ceremony based on her exceptional riding skills and her horse's reliability under pressure. At 24, she was one of only a handful of female troopers in the Blues and Royals, part of a gradual evolution that Prince Philip himself had supported during his later years as Colonel-in-Chief. Davies remembered the moment she had learned of Prince Philip's death. She had been in the stables, grooming Mercury after a training exercise, when Sergeant Major Roberts had gathered the troopers to share the news. The silence that followed had been profound, not just the absence of sound, but the collective realization that an era was ending. Prince Philip had been 99 years old, and his death had not been unexpected, but the finality of it still came as a shock. For decades, he had been a constant presence in British public life, the tall figure always one step behind the Queen, the man whose sharp wit and occasional controversial comments had made headlines around the world. Now, suddenly, he was gone. Davies had grown up hearing stories about Prince Philip from her grandfather, who had served in the Royal Navy during the later years of World War II. Her grandfather had never met the Duke personally, but he had served on ships that operated in the same theater as Philip's HMS Valiant and HMS Whelp. The connection felt personal, a thread linking her family's military service to the man they were now honoring. As the cavalry formed up along the long walk, Davies could see Windsor Castle clearly across the carefully manicured landscape. The ancient fortress rose from the Thames Valley like something from a fairy tale, its towers and battlements speaking of nearly 1,000 years of royal history. Somewhere behind those stone walls, Queen Elizabeth II was preparing for the most difficult week of her long reign. The Queen and Prince Philip had been married for 73 years, longer than most people lived. They had shared a life of unprecedented public service, weathering personal tragedies, constitutional crises, and the constant pressure of being the most famous couple in the world. Now, at age 94, the Queen would have to continue that journey alone. Lieutenant Colonel James Ashworth, the senior officer commanding today's ceremony, had met Prince Philip on numerous occasions throughout his 30-year career. The Duke had possessed a remarkable ability to remember faces and details about individual soldiers, often asking about their families or following up on conversations from previous encounters. Ashworth's most memorable meeting with Prince Philip had occurred in 2015, during a regimental celebration marking the Blues and Royals' contribution to Operation Herrick in Afghanistan. The Duke, then in his mid-90s, had spent over an hour speaking with veterans about their experiences in combat. His questions were informed and thoughtful, demonstrating a genuine understanding of modern military operations despite his own service being decades in the past. "He never talked down to us," Ashworth had told his wife after that meeting. "He spoke to us as fellow soldiers. You could tell he understood what we'd been through because he'd been there himself, just in a different war." Now, as Ashworth watched his troops prepare for the tribute ceremony, he reflected on what Prince Philip's loss meant for the military community. The Duke had been more than a ceremonial figurehead. He had been a genuine advocate for service members, using his position to highlight their contributions and support military charities. His patronage of organizations like the Army Benevolent Fund and his work with veteran rehabilitation programs had made a real difference in thousands of lives. The morning air carried the sound of church bells from Windsor Parish Church, their ancient bronze voices marking the hour. In 3 days, those same bells would toll for Prince Philip's funeral, a ceremony that would be watched by millions around the world. But today's tribute was more intimate, a soldier's farewell organized by those who had served under his command. Corporal Daniel Thompson had joined the Household Cavalry just 18 months earlier, transferring from the Parachute Regiment after completing his initial service. The transition from infantry to cavalry had required learning entirely new skills: horsemanship, ceremonial drill, and the intricate protocols that governed the sovereign's bodyguard. But Thompson had adapted quickly, driven by the honor of serving in one of the British Army's most prestigious units. Thompson's horse, Apollo, was a veteran of countless ceremonies. The 12-year-old bay gelding had carried troopers during state visits, royal weddings, and the annual Trooping the Color ceremony. Apollo's calm temperament and reliable performance had made him a favorite for important occasions, and Thompson felt privileged to ride such an exceptional animal. The relationship between cavalry trooper and horse was unlike any other partnership in the military. These were not vehicles or equipment to be operated, but living beings with personalities, preferences, and moods. Success in the Household Cavalry required not just military discipline, but genuine horsemanship, the ability to communicate with and understand an animal that weighed over half a ton and possessed its own agenda. Thompson had spent countless hours training with Apollo, learning the gelding's quirks and building the trust that would be essential during public ceremonies. The horse had a tendency to become excited around crowds, requiring careful management to maintain the perfect stillness expected during formal occasions. But Apollo also had an almost supernatural ability to sense important moments, standing motionless when the situation demanded absolute precision. As the cavalry continued forming up along the long walk, Thompson could see members of the public beginning to gather at the periphery of the ceremony area. Word had spread through Windsor and the surrounding communities about the tribute, and people were arriving to witness this historic moment. Many carried flowers or small British flags, their faces reflecting the same sense of loss and respect that motivated the military ceremony. Prince Philip had enjoyed a unique relationship with the British people. Unlike other members of the royal family, who maintained a careful distance from controversy, the Duke had been known for his unfiltered comments and willingness to speak his mind. This had occasionally caused embarrassment, but it had also made him seem more human and relatable than his position might otherwise have allowed. Stories of Prince Philip's wit and sometimes inappropriate humor were legendary. He had asked a group of British students in China if they would become slitty-eyed from staying too long in the country. He had inquired about the electrical qualifications of an apparently incompetent fuse box installer. He had suggested that a driving instructor in Scotland was brave for taking on elderly students. The comments had caused diplomatic incidents and media firestorms, but they had also revealed a man who refused to be confined by the expectations of his role. For military personnel, Prince Philip's directness had been refreshing. He spoke to soldiers as equals, asking tough questions about their training, equipment, and welfare. His interest was genuine, not performative, and troops could sense the difference. When Prince Philip expressed concern about military housing or questioned defense procurement decisions, it carried weight because everyone knew he actually cared about the answers. The household cavalry's bandmaster, Chief Warrant Officer Michael Stevens, had arrived early to coordinate the musical elements of the tribute. Stevens had served with military bands for over 20 years, performing at state occasions around the world. But today's ceremony held special significance because of his personal connection to Prince Philip. Stevens had been part of the band that performed during Prince Philip's 90th birthday celebration in 2011. The Duke had specifically requested pieces from his naval service, including Heart of Oak and Rule Britannia. During the rehearsal, Prince Philip had approached the band to suggest minor adjustments to the tempo and emphasis of certain passages. His musical knowledge and attention to detail had impressed the professional musicians. He didn't just request the music, Stevens had told his colleagues afterward. He understood it. He knew why those pieces mattered and how they should be performed. Today's musical program would honor that memory. The band would perform a selection of pieces with personal significance to Prince Philip, including hymns from his wedding to then Princess Elizabeth in 1947. The music would be audible from Windsor Castle, allowing the royal family to hear this tribute from their private quarters. As the ceremony preparation entered its final phase, Morrison received confirmation that representatives from other Commonwealth militaries would be participating in the tribute. Officers from Australia, Canada, and New Zealand had requested permission to join the ceremony, reflecting Prince Philip's role as Colonel-in-Chief of numerous military units throughout the Commonwealth realms. The international participation added another dimension to the tribute. Prince Philip had served not just Britain, but the entire Commonwealth, representing Queen Elizabeth II during thousands of visits to member nations. His death was being mourned in capitals from Ottawa to Canberra, where flags flew at half-mast and special memorial services were being planned. The Commonwealth connection had been particularly important to Prince Philip personally. Born Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, he had become a naturalized British subject before his marriage to Princess Elizabeth. But his service had extended far beyond Britain, encompassing a global network of nations united by shared history and common values. As the final adjustments were made to equipment and formations, Morrison felt the weight of history settling over the ceremony. This was not just a military parade or ceremonial display. It was a farewell to a man who had shaped the modern monarchy and influenced the military services for over 7 decades. The tribute was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. Across the long walk, Windsor Castle stood ready to witness an unprecedented display of military respect and affection. The household cavalry, Prince Philip's own regiment, would demonstrate their gratitude for his leadership and their commitment to the traditions he had helped preserve. The ceremony would be formal and dignified, befitting the occasion and the man being honored. But it would also be deeply personal, a soldier's farewell organized by those who had served under Prince Philip's command and benefited from his advocacy. Today, the household cavalry would show the world what military loyalty and respect looked like when expressed through perfect drill and ceremonial excellence. The moment had arrived. At precisely 11 o'clock in the morning, Captain Morrison raised his sword in salute, and the household cavalry began their tribute to Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. The synchronized movement of 48 horses and riders created a spectacle that had been witnessed by royalty for centuries, but today carried special significance that resonated across the manicured grounds of Windsor Great Park. The ceremony opened with the traditional advance in review order, a complex maneuver that required perfect coordination between horse and rider. Each trooper sat motionless as their mount moved forward in precise alignment, creating the illusion of a single, fluid organism rather than dozens of individual animals and soldiers. The effect was mesmerizing, a display of military excellence that had been perfected over generations. Trooper Chun felt Apollo's muscles bunch beneath him as they moved into the ceremonial pace. The gelding's ears were pricked forward, alert to every sound and movement around them. Chin's job was to guide the horse while maintaining the perfect posture expected of a household cavalry trooper. Back straight, head high, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond Windsor Castle. The training for this moment had taken months. Chin and Apollo had practiced the ceremonial movements until they became second nature, drilling in all weather conditions and at all times of day. The horse had learned to ignore distractions, to move at precisely the correct pace, and to stop instantly at the rider's command. But more than technical skill, today required the intangible quality that separated great cavalry from merely competent soldiers: the ability to perform flawlessly while honoring the memory of a fallen leader. As the cavalry moved through their opening formation, the sound of the regimental band filled the air. Chief Warrant Officer Stevens had positioned his musicians to maximize the acoustic effect, ensuring that their performance would be heard clearly from Windsor Castle. The opening piece was the Life Guard's Slow March, a hauntingly beautiful melody that had accompanied countless military ceremonies over the decades. The music created an emotional backdrop that elevated the ceremony beyond mere pageantry. Each note carried the weight of tradition, connecting this moment to countless previous occasions when the household cavalry had honored fallen comrades and departed leaders. The melody spoke of sacrifice, loyalty, and the continuity of service that bound past, present, and future together. From her position in the second rank, Trooper Davies could see members of the public gathering along the edges of the long walk. Many were elderly, people who had lived through Prince Philip's entire career of public service. Some carried flowers or small photographs, personal tributes to a man who had touched their lives in ways both grand and subtle. Davies noticed an older woman standing near the trees, her face streaked with tears as she watched the cavalry perform their tribute. The woman held a small Union Jack and what appeared to be a military medal, perhaps from her own service or that of a family member. The sight reminded Davies that Prince Philip's death represented more than the loss of a royal figure. It marked the end of an era for an entire generation that had known no other Duke of Edinburgh. Prince Philip had been a constant presence in British life for so long that his absence would leave a void that could not be filled. He had witnessed the transformation of the British Empire into the Commonwealth, the decline and renewal of the monarchy's popularity, and the evolution of the military from a conscript force to today's professional services. His perspective spanned decades of change that had reshaped Britain and the world. The cavalry formation continued to evolve as they moved through the ceremonial sequence. Lieutenant Colonel Ashworth had designed the tribute to showcase different aspects of the household cavalry's capabilities while maintaining the solemnity appropriate to a memorial service. The movements were familiar to anyone who had attended state occasions, but their execution today carried special poignancy. Ashworth himself rode at the head of the formation, his mount stepping with a measured pace that had been drilled into both horse and rider through countless hours of practice. His position as senior officer meant that any imperfection in the ceremony would reflect on his leadership, but he felt confident in his troops and their preparation. More importantly, he knew that Prince Philip would have appreciated the effort and attention to detail that had gone into planning this tribute. The Duke had possessed an engineer's mind, with a deep appreciation for precision and efficiency. During his visits to the regiment, he had often asked detailed questions about training methods, equipment maintenance, and operational procedures. His interest was not casual. He genuinely wanted to understand how things worked and whether they could be improved. Ashworth remembered one particular conversation with Prince Philip about the challenges of training cavalry horses for ceremonial duties. The Duke had made several practical suggestions based on his own experience with horses, demonstrating a depth of knowledge that impressed the professional soldiers. When Prince Philip spoke about military matters, it was with the authority of someone who had actually served in combat and understood the realities of military life. As the ceremony progressed, the second phase began with the presentation of colors. Representatives from the foot guards had arrived to participate in this element of the tribute, bringing with them the battle honors and regimental colors that represented centuries of military service. The sight of Britain's most elite infantry units joining the household cavalry created a display of military pageantry that was unmatched anywhere in the world. Sergeant Major Roberts carried the blues and royal standard, its silk fabric bearing battle honors from campaigns stretching back to the regiment's earliest incarnations. Blenheim, Waterloo, Normandy. The names embroidered on the standard represented moments when British cavalry had played decisive roles in shaping history. Today, that same standard would honor a man who had embodied the virtues those battles represented. Roberts felt the weight of history as he carried the colors forward. His grandfather had served with the Royal Horse Guards during World War I, fighting in the last great cavalry charges before mechanization changed warfare forever. The standard Roberts now carried connected him to that heritage, to generations of soldiers who had served crown and country with distinction. Prince Philip would have understood that connection. Despite his naval background, he had possessed a deep appreciation for military tradition and its role in maintaining unit cohesion and esprit de corps. He had often spoken about the importance of remembering the past while adapting to present realities, a balance that required both respect for tradition and willingness to embrace necessary change. The musical program continued with Jerusalem, the hymn that had become an unofficial English anthem. The words, written by William Blake, spoke of building a better future while honoring the past, themes that had resonated throughout Prince Philip's career of public service. The melody soared above the long walk, carrying with it the hopes and aspirations of a nation saying farewell to one of its most devoted servants. As the band played, the cavalry began the most technically challenging portion of the ceremony, a series of intricate maneuvers that required perfect timing and communication between horses and riders. The movements were based on traditional cavalry tactics, but had evolved into pure pageantry, each evolution designed to showcase the skill and dedication of Britain's finest mounted soldiers. Corporal Thompson felt Apollo respond to his subtle cues as they moved through a complex figure-8 pattern. The gelding's training showed in every step, each movement precise and controlled despite the distractions of music, crowds, and other horses. This was cavalry work at its finest, the result of a partnership between human and animal that took years to develop. The horses themselves seemed to understand the significance of the occasion. Veterans like Apollo had performed in front of royalty many times, but there was something different about today's ceremony. Perhaps it was the absolute silence of the crowd, or the unusual solemnity of the riders, but the animals moved with exceptional precision and focus. Thompson had read accounts of cavalry horses in earlier eras, animals that had charged in a battle alongside their riders and developed bonds that went beyond mere training. While modern ceremonial horses never face combat, they still form deep relationships with their human partners, relationships based on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. Prince Philip had understood that bond. His own love of horses and carriage driving had given him insight into the unique requirements of cavalry service. During his visits to the regiment, he had often spent as much time examining the horses as inspecting the soldiers, recognizing that cavalry excellence required both elements to work in perfect harmony. As the ceremony entered its final phase, Morrison prepared for the moment that would serve as the emotional climax of the tribute. The cavalry would form into a single line facing Windsor Castle, and each trooper would draw their sword in unison. The flash of steel in the morning sunlight would create a visual salute that could be seen clearly from the royal residence. The maneuver required precise timing and absolute stillness once completed. 48 swords would be drawn simultaneously, held at the present arms position for exactly 60 seconds, then returned to their scabbards with equal precision. The effect would be dramatic, but dignified, a warrior's farewell to a fallen leader. Morrison checked his watch and realized that they were ahead of schedule, a testament to the preparation and professionalism of his troops. He made a subtle adjustment to the timing, allowing for a brief pause that would heighten the impact of the final salute. These were the kinds of details that separated great ceremony from merely adequate performance. The crowd had grown throughout the morning, but remained respectfully quiet as the cavalry moved through their tribute. Many were filming the ceremony with mobile phones, understanding that they were witnessing a historic moment that deserved to be recorded for future generations. The combination of ancient tradition and modern technology created a poignant reminder of how much had changed during Prince Philip's lifetime. As the formation moved toward its final configuration, Morrison could see Windsor Castle clearly across the long walk. The ancient fortress stood silent and imposing, its stones having witnessed nearly a millennium of royal history. Behind those walls, Queen Elizabeth II was beginning the most difficult period of her long reign, supported by family and staff, but ultimately facing the future alone. The tribute was approaching its conclusion, but the memory of Prince Philip's service would endure. The household cavalry would continue to serve the crown with the same dedication he had exemplified, carrying forward the traditions he had helped preserve while adapting to the challenges of a new era. Today's ceremony was not just an ending, but a beginning, the start of a future shaped by the example Prince Philip had set during his remarkable life of service. The moment of absolute silence that preceded the final salute stretched across the long walk like a held breath. 48 mounted soldiers sat motionless, their horses equally still, as Captain Morrison prepared to give the command that would bring the tribute ceremony to its climax. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting the entire scene in brilliant light that seemed to illuminate not just the present moment, but the weight of history itself. Morrison raised his sword slowly, the movement deliberate and measured. Behind him, every trooper's hand moved to their sword hilt, waiting for the command that would unite them in a single gesture of respect and farewell. The silence was profound. No traffic noise from distant roads, no aircraft overhead. Even the wind seemed to have stilled in recognition of the solemnity of the moment. "Draw swords." Morrison's voice carried clearly across the formation, sharp and commanding despite the emotion underlying the words. The sound of 48 cavalry sabers sliding from their scabbards created a metallic symphony that echoed off the stone walls of Windsor Castle. The precision was breathtaking. 48 individual movements executed as one, creating a flash of steel that caught the morning light and sent reflections dancing across the landscape. For exactly 60 seconds, the household cavalry held their salute. 60 seconds during which time seemed suspended, during which the weight of Prince Philip's 7 decades of service seemed to settle over the ceremony like a blessing. 60 seconds that connected this moment to countless previous occasions when the sovereign's bodyguard had honored fallen leaders and departed comrades. Trooper Davies felt tears threatening as she held her saber at the present arms. Mercury stood beneath her like a statue, the gelding's training evident in his absolute stillness despite the emotional intensity of the moment. Around her, she could sense rather than see the same profound respect and grief that filled her own heart reflected in every member of the regiment. The tribute had been planned as a military ceremony, but it had become something more personal and intimate. Each trooper was saying their own private farewell to Prince Philip, remembering encounters, stories, or simply the knowledge that his presence had shaped their service in ways both obvious and subtle. Davies thought about her grandmother, who had served as a nurse during World War II and had met Prince Philip briefly during a hospital visit in the early years of his marriage. Her grandmother had often spoken about the young Duke's genuine interest in the patients and staff, his ability to make people feel valued and appreciated despite his exalted position. That quality, the ability to connect with people regardless of rank or status, had defined Prince Philip's approach to public service throughout his life. He had spoken to generals and privates with equal respect, asking thoughtful questions and listening carefully to the answers. His interest had been genuine, not performative, and military personnel had recognized and appreciated the difference. The 60 seconds passed with agonizing slowness and breathtaking speed simultaneously. When Morrison finally gave the command to return swords, the synchronized movement created another metallic chord that seemed to hang in the air before fading into silence. The formal portion of the ceremony was complete, but the emotional impact would linger long after the last horse had left the long walk. As the cavalry began their withdrawal from the ceremonial ground, the regimental band struck up the last post, the haunting bugle call that had concluded military funerals and memorial services for generations. The melody spoke of endings and farewells, but also of hope and continuity, the understanding that while individuals might pass on, the institutions and values they served would endure. Chief Warrant Officer Stevens had positioned a single bugler apart from the main band for this final piece. The solo performance created an even more intimate and personal feeling, as if the entire ceremony were being reduced to its emotional essence. One soldier's tribute to a fallen leader, magnified and reflected by the assembled cavalry, and witnessed by a nation in mourning. The notes of the last post carried across Windsor Great Park, reaching far beyond the immediate ceremony to touch the hundreds of spectators who had gathered to witness this historic moment. Many were crying openly now, their grief for Prince Philip mixed with pride in the magnificent tribute being performed in his honor. Lieutenant Williams watched from her position with the band as the cavalry completed their withdrawal. The ceremony had exceeded even her highest expectations, combining technical excellence with genuine emotion in a way that honored both Prince Philip's memory and the traditions of the household cavalry. The musical elements had provided the perfect accompaniment to the visual pageantry, creating a tribute that engaged both mind and heart. Williams had researched Prince Philip's musical interests while planning today's program, discovering that he had been an accomplished pianist and had composed several pieces during his naval service. His appreciation for music had been sophisticated and informed, another example of the depth and complexity that had characterized his approach to every aspect of life. The Duke's intellectual curiosity had been legendary among those who knew him personally. He had maintained active interests in science, technology, environmental conservation, and numerous other fields throughout his life. His questions during official visits had often surprised experts with their depth and insight, revealing a man who did his homework and genuinely wanted to understand the subjects he encountered. This intellectual engagement had extended to his military roles as well. Prince Philip had not been content to serve as a ceremonial figurehead. He had studied military history, kept abreast of technological developments, and maintained genuine friendships with serving officers across all three services. His contributions to military thinking and policy had been substantial, though often conducted behind the scenes away from public attention. As the last notes of the last post faded into silence, Sergeant Major Roberts felt a profound sense of completion. The tribute had achieved everything they had hoped for, a fitting farewell to Prince Philip that honored his service while demonstrating the continued excellence of the regiment he had led for over 50 years. Roberts had participated in dozens of ceremonial occasions throughout his career, but few had carried the emotional weight of today's tribute. The combination of personal grief and professional pride had created something special, a moment that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. The crowd began to disperse slowly, reluctant to leave the site of such a moving ceremony. Many approached the barriers that had kept them at a respectful distance, hoping to express their appreciation to the soldiers who had created this magnificent tribute. The interaction between military and civilians reflected the deep respect and affection that existed between the household cavalry and the British people. Corporal Thompson dismounted from Apollo with a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the ceremony had been executed flawlessly, sadness that it was over, and that the reason for it could not be changed. Apollo had performed magnificently, displaying the calm temperament and reliable character that made him ideal for ceremonial duties. The bond between cavalry trooper and horse had been essential to today's success. Without the trust and understanding that existed between each rider and mount, the complex maneuvers and precise timing would have been impossible. The horses had seemed to understand the importance of the occasion, performing with exceptional focus and dignity throughout the ceremony. Thompson thought about the future of the household cavalry and their relationship with the royal family. Prince Philip had been colonel-in-chief for over 50 years, providing continuity and personal connection that had shaped the regiment's identity. His successor in that role would inherit not just the title, but the responsibility of maintaining the bond between the sovereign's bodyguard and the crown they served. The ceremony had demonstrated that the values Prince Philip had embodied, dedication, excellence, and service, remained alive and strong within the regiment. The household cavalry would continue to evolve and adapt to changing circumstances, but the fundamental commitment to duty that had driven today's tribute would endure. Captain Morrison remained mounted as his troops began their return to barracks, taking a final moment to survey the scene of their tribute. The long walk stretched away toward Windsor Castle, now empty except for the gradually dispersing crowd and the flowers that some spectators had left in remembrance of Prince Philip. The ceremony had been everything Morrison had hoped for: dignified, moving, and worthy of the man being honored. More importantly, it had demonstrated the continued vitality of the traditions Prince Philip had helped preserve. The household cavalry remained capable of performing at the highest level, maintaining standards of excellence that would have made their former colonel-in-chief proud. As Morrison finally turned his horse toward the return journey, he reflected on what Prince Philip's death meant for the future of the monarchy and the military services that supported it. Change was inevitable, but the example of duty and dedication the Duke had provided would continue to inspire future generations of soldiers, sailors, and airmen. The tribute ceremony was over, but its impact would last far beyond this single morning. The household cavalry had said farewell to Prince Philip in the way he would have wanted, with precision, dignity, and genuine emotion. The memory of today's ceremony would become part of the regiment's proud history, a reminder of their commitment to the crown and the values it represented. Windsor Castle stood silent and majestic in the distance, its ancient walls having witnessed another chapter in the long story of royal and military service. Inside those walls, the royal family would continue their period of mourning, supported by the knowledge that Prince Philip's legacy lived on in the institutions he had served so faithfully throughout his remarkable life. The aftermath of the tribute ceremony brought a different kind of silence to the long walk. As the last of the household cavalry disappeared toward their barracks, and the crowd slowly dispersed, the ancient avenue returned to its usual quiet dignity. But the echoes of what had just transpired seemed to linger in the air, invisible but unmistakable, like the memory of beautiful music that continues to resonate long after the last note has faded. Captain Morrison had remained behind to oversee the final details, ensuring that all equipment was accounted for, that the ceremonial ground was properly cleared, and that the dozens of small tasks that concluded any major military operation were completed to the exacting standards Prince Philip himself would have expected. As he worked, Morrison found himself reflecting on the significance of what they had just accomplished. The tribute had been more than a ceremonial display. It had been a bridge between past and future, connecting the household cavalry's rich heritage to the challenges that lay ahead. Prince Philip's death marked the end of an era, but it also represented the beginning of a new chapter in the long relationship between the monarchy and the military services that protected it. Morrison watched as the last flowers were carefully collected by staff from the royal parks. Members of the public had left dozens of bouquets along the barriers, each one representing a personal tribute to Prince Philip's memory. The diversity of the offerings, from elaborate formal arrangements to simple bunches of daffodils, reflected the broad affection the Duke had earned across all segments of British society. Among the flowers, Morrison noticed several military medals and insignia that had been left as tributes. A Naval Distinguished Service Cross, an Army Long Service Medal, even what appeared to be a pilot's wings from the Royal Air Force. Each represented a personal connection to Prince Philip's military legacy, tangible reminders of the impact his service had made on individual lives and careers. The sight reminded Morrison of a conversation he had once had with an elderly veteran who had served aboard HMS Whelp during Prince Philip's time as first lieutenant. The man had spoken eloquently about the Duke's leadership qualities, his ability to inspire confidence in difficult situations, and his genuine concern for the welfare of his sailors. Those qualities had remained consistent throughout Prince Philip's life, expressed in different contexts, but always rooted in the fundamental understanding that leadership meant service to others. As the cleanup continued, Morrison received word that the ceremony had been observed from Windsor Castle by several members of the royal family. The knowledge that their tribute had been witnessed by those closest to Prince Philip added another layer of meaning to the day's events. The household cavalry had performed not just for the public or the media, but for the people who knew Prince Philip best and who would miss him most deeply. The practical aftermath of the ceremony would continue for days. Equipment needed to be cleaned and stored, horses required care after their ceremonial duties, and detailed reports would be filed documenting every aspect of the operation. But the emotional impact would last much longer, becoming part of the collective memory of everyone who had participated. Trooper Davies was among the last to leave the long walk, having volunteered to assist with the final cleanup duties. As she worked, she found herself thinking about the future of her own military career and how Prince Philip's example would continue to influence her service. The Duke had faced countless challenges during his 7 decades of public duty, adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining his core commitment to service and excellence. The lesson for Davies and her fellow soldiers was clear. The forms of service might evolve, but the fundamental principles remained constant. The household cavalry would continue to evolve with the times, incorporating new technologies and adapting to changing security requirements, but their essential mission, protecting the sovereign and representing the best traditions of British military service, would endure. Davies thought about the young people she had seen in the crowd during the ceremony, children and teenagers who had witnessed something extraordinary. For them, today's tribute might be their first real encounter with military tradition and the values it represented. The sight of perfectly disciplined soldiers honoring a fallen leader might inspire some of them to consider their own future service to their country. That inspirational aspect had been important to Prince Philip throughout his life. His work with the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme had introduced millions of young people to concepts of service, challenge, and personal development. His military patronages had helped maintain public awareness of and support for the armed forces. Even in death, his example continued to influence and inspire. Sergeant Major Roberts supervised the loading of the last ceremonial equipment, his practice ensuring that every piece was properly secured for transport. The swords, plumes, and other regalia that had created today's magnificent spectacle would soon be returned to their normal storage, waiting for the next occasion when duty would call them into service. But Roberts knew that the true significance of today's ceremony lay not in the equipment or even the precision of the drill, but in the spirit that had animated the entire operation. The household cavalry had demonstrated something that could not be taught or manufactured: genuine respect and affection for a leader who had earned their loyalty through decades of devoted service. The bond between Prince Philip and the military services had been forged in the crucible of shared experience and mutual respect. Unlike many ceremonial appointments, his military roles had been based on real knowledge and understanding. He had known what it meant to serve in difficult conditions, to face danger, and to bear responsibility for others' welfare. That shared experience had created connections that transcended rank and protocol. As the vehicles carrying the ceremonial equipment departed, Roberts took a final look back toward Windsor Castle. The fortress stood unchanged, its ancient stones having witnessed today's tribute with the same silent dignity that had marked their observation of centuries of royal history. Behind those walls, the royal family was continuing their private mourning, supported by the knowledge that Prince Philip's public legacy was secure. The media coverage of the tribute had been extensive, with images and footage of the ceremony being broadcast around the world. The sight of the household cavalry honoring their former colonel-in-chief had resonated far beyond Britain's borders, touching everyone who understood the universal values of duty, loyalty, and service that the ceremony represented. Lieutenant Colonel Ashworth remained at the ceremony site longer than anyone else, conducting a final inspection of the ground and ensuring that the area was returned to its normal condition. As the senior officer present, he bore ultimate responsibility for the tribute's execution, but, more importantly, he felt a personal obligation to see that every detail reflected the respect Prince Philip deserved. The ceremony had exceeded Ashworth's expectations in every way. The precision of the drill, the discipline of both horses and riders, and the emotional impact of the tribute had combined to create something truly memorable. But beyond the technical excellence, Ashworth was most proud of the genuine emotion his soldiers had displayed. Their grief and respect had been authentic, not performed, and that authenticity had elevated the entire ceremony. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, Ashworth finally began his own departure from the long walk. The immediate aftermath of the tribute was complete, but its longer-term impact was just beginning. The ceremony would be remembered and discussed for years to come, becoming part of the historical record of Prince Philip's extraordinary life and the military traditions he had helped preserve. The story of today's tribute would be told and retold, passed down through the ranks of the household cavalry as part of their oral history. Future generations of soldiers would learn about the morning when their regiment honored Prince Philip with perfect drill and genuine emotion, when ancient traditions were employed to express timeless values of service and sacrifice. For the immediate participants, today's ceremony marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. They had said farewell to Prince Philip in the manner he would have appreciated most, with excellence, dignity, and heartfelt respect. Now, they would carry forward the traditions he had helped preserve, adapting to new challenges while maintaining the standards he had exemplified throughout his remarkable life. As the long walk returned to its normal quiet, the lasting impact of the tribute began to spread. Videos and photographs of the ceremony circulated on social media, carrying the image of the household cavalry's magnificent farewell to audiences around the world. The sight of perfectly disciplined soldiers honoring their former leader resonated with anyone who understood the values of duty, honor, and service. The tribute to Prince Philip had been completed, but its legacy would endure. The household cavalry had demonstrated that the traditions the Duke had championed remained vital and strong. The future would bring new challenges and changes, but the fundamental commitment to excellence and service that had defined today's ceremony would continue to guide the regiment through whatever lay ahead. In the distance, Windsor Castle stood eternal and unchanging, its ancient walls having witnessed another moment in the long story of royal and military service. The tribute was over, but the values it had celebrated would live on, carried forward by new generations of soldiers committed to the same ideals that had shaped Prince Philip's extraordinary life of service to crown and country.